This is Sarah Heredia, and you are listening to the Freely You podcast. Our time together is meant to inspire you to think bigger and empower you to live your life in a way that makes you proud to be you. I believe that the only box you should fit in is the one that you build for yourself, and I'm here to help you lay the foundation. My journey has taught me that we all deserve to create our own definition of success while meeting ourselves with love and a playful curiosity. My goal is to provide practical tools and fresh perspectives so you can rewrite your story, start living your life on purpose, and ultimately become more freely you. Well, hello there and welcome back. So very thankful that you have decided to tune in to this conversation today because we are chatting all about failure. And I recently had what could very easily be considered a failure in my business. And honestly, it just reminded me of why failure just has to be part of the game. And if we're going to do big things in our lives, if we're going to create something different for ourselves, something that's unknown or that we feel uncertain about, more likely than not, there are going to be failures along the way. And that is just part of it. And so what I want to do today is shift your perspective on failure, because what I was recently reminded of is that our failures are always there to show us exactly what we need to see. They're always there to redirect us. And a lot of times it's just an opportunity for us to come back and do it bigger and do it better and more grounded and more aligned than we did the first time around. So that's where we're headed today. And really, I want to give you kind of 3 things that you should actually be excited about when you think about the possibility of failure. Because I know from personal experience that a lot of times it is our fear of failing, of not doing it right, of looking silly, of not being capable. That is the thing that keeps us from even trying to go after our dreams or go after the things that we have gotten little hits that have told us, like, this is the way, this is what's meant for you. But we often get stuck in our heads and tell ourselves stories about all the reasons that it won't work. And it is that fear of not being able to make it happen, of failing, that keeps us from even trying. And that's the last thing that I want from you, because I know that you are somebody that is here to do big things. I know that you are breaking cycles. I know that you are stepping into next levels. And with that, there's always going to be fear. And there probably, in real talk, will be failure. It is part of it. And that is, there's a million quotes. I didn't write any of them down for you, but so many quotes on success, and that failure is really just part of success. There is no success without failure. So I recently had my retreat scheduled, my winter retreat, first ever winter retreat, scheduled for the beginning of March. If you've been following along closely, you know that I ended up doing a more of a mini retreat with the 3 women that had originally committed to be part of my retreat. And to be really honest with you, I have learned a lot. And there is a lot that I could share on that. But I think that what I can see so clearly, because my goal for that retreat, just to be fully honest with you, I wanted to have 8 women at that retreat plus myself. And I ended up having 3 plus myself. And so did that feel like a failure in the moment? Absolutely. Also, you may know that I have rescheduled my retreat for May. I'm doing another one, May 20th through 22nd. And choosing that felt like part of the failure. It felt like, well, if I'm rescheduling this, if I'm saying that there's a new set of dates, then I also have to, in that same breath, admit that the first one didn't go the way that I planned, that it didn't work out, that it wasn't the giant success, although it was a huge success actually for myself, but it wasn't a success in the fact that it was exactly what I thought that it was going to be. And I went to a full moon ceremony as I was making this decision, right? Because we're now like, so this is leading up to it. This is like February of this year. And I have these 3 women that have committed to the retreat. And I am faced with this very real decision of like, am I going to hold on and hope that 5 women fall out of the sky and that I make this happen the way that I had initially planned? Or am I going to pivot? Or am I going to swallow that pill that it didn't work out and I have to talk about that publicly and I have to let that be part of my story? And am I okay to do that? And so it was around this time that I went to a full moon ceremony. And of course, this full moon was all about our ego. And it was all about how our ego gets in the way of our truth ultimately, because we're so worried about, how we're going to be perceived. And it's a hit to our pride. And, really, I mean, for me, it was so much a perception. Like, well, who the fuck is they? I don't know. But what if they think that like I'm not cut out to do retreats and I don't have the interest? And honestly, that just wasn't the case. Like, for whatever reason, from the very beginning, these dates were just never it never clicked the way that my first retreat did, which was a huge success, by the way. So that's the other irony. I have evidence that this can work. I have evidence that I'm capable. I have evidence that it's absolutely amazing when I get the right women together in the right place and right time. And it wasn't working out that way for me. And so after this full moon ceremony, there was just this huge time of just pure reflection. Like, how much of this is your ego? Like, how much of this, is this the end of the world? Not really. Life's going to go on. It doesn't mean anything about the retreats I can host in the future. It doesn't mean anything about the retreat that I'm hosting in May. It doesn't mean anything about me. And I had to let go of the pieces inside of me that wanted all of that to be true, that I wasn't good enough, that it wasn't working out, that people were never going to come to a retreat of mine again, that, it was just like the end of the world. And I was telling a friend about all of these reflections that I was having, and she was like, well, if you end up canceling it, Sarah, what's the worst that could happen? And the immediate word that came to mind was failure, in capital, bold, red letters, failure. And honestly, that word, that thought made me it made my heart stop. And I've talked about how recently I've had the whole throat chakra closing up thing, which is a very old trauma response that is still in my body, I'm recognizing, which is actually doing much better. Thank you, Lord. But it was I couldn't even swallow. That is how horrible that word felt in my body. Failure. It literally felt like the equivalent of death. It was that's it. That's the end of me. I should just toss in the towel, go hide under a rock, and never talk about anything that I want to do or accomplish or be ever again. And that is some real talk right there, because that is how it felt in the moment. And it still felt like that for a little bit. If I'm being honest, it wasn't easy to say, you know what, this didn't work out. It's still I'm still at the point that I'm talking about it to you right now. I'm still in the middle of putting this out there that this didn't work out the way that I planned for it. And that's okay. But immediate response is it's the end of the fucking world. There's no hope for me. And so I want to normalize that for you, because that's the thing. When we want big things, when we have big goals, or when we are trying to shift things about ourselves and we're on this path of growth, there's going to be these moments where it's just not working the way that we think that it should, or it doesn't look the way that we want. And it can feel like the end of the world. And a lot of times it's the thing that prevents us from even going after what we want. Because if we take a big risk like that, there is very much a chance that we're going to have a gigantic reward for our endeavors. And there's very much a chance that it might not work out the first time, the second time, the third time. That's where our commitment comes into play. And that's where we have to be unwavering. But I don't want to downplay just how big it feels when we're in those situations, when we're making these decisions that feel bigger than us, because we don't want to fail, because we don't want to look bad, because we don't want anybody to know that we tried something and it didn't work out. Like how embarrassing, it's like, it just feels like the worst thing that could happen to us. And so this is really the first takeaway that I'm taking from my failure, is that if you're not failing, you're not pushing your edges. You are not getting to your limits. You're not stepping up and saying, okay, I've made it this far, and now what? I easily could have stopped after one retreat, you guys. And I'm not going to lie, I was scared to do a second retreat because the first one went off without a hitch. Everybody was happy. Everybody was impacted. The weather was perfect. Like, it literally just couldn't have been any better of an experience. So when that's the bar, the second one was like, oh God, can I do it again? Oh God, is it going to be okay? Well, it's in winter. Are people going to make it? Is it going to snow the whole time? Like, are people going to be okay with that? Just all the doubts, even though I had the evidence that it could work. But when we're pushing our edges, when we are deciding that we want something bigger from ourselves, that's when failure comes into play. That's the only time that we look failure in the face. If we're not trying, if we're not putting ourselves out there, if we're not growing, then there's no risk of failure, right? And I find that people do this, like even with like New Year's resolutions. It's like sometimes people don't want to say it because they don't want to ultimately fail. You have to be willing to push your limits. And with that, there may be failure involved. And that's just part of it. If you are growing, you will be met with the possibility of failure. So that's actually something to really celebrate. That's actually something to get excited about, that you wouldn't even be debating if you were going to fail at this thing or couldn't do it if you weren't pushing your limits. And as long as you're pushing your limits, you're gonna get further than probably you even think you are. But it might take a failure or two, and that's okay. So that is like number one, when we're looking at failure, the positive side of that you can kind of anchor into is that it's your growth. If you don't get it this time, you're going to get it next time, and you're probably going to start closer than you were before. Right? If you are failing, you are growing. And that, in my book, is always going to be a win, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. The second part of that, and like the number two takeaway of why you should be excited about your failures, why these failures should be a positive thing, is that when we are failing, there's so much feedback that we're getting from that. There's so much for us to take in and to process about how we went about it the first time or the second time or the third time or the fourth time that we need to do differently to achieve what it is that we want. Looking back on this retreat, I can see that I was not all in at the beginning. I can see that I was wishy-washy. I could see that I was nervous about the location, that I wasn't super familiar with it, nervous that I couldn't pull it off a second time, you know? So the foundation going into my event planning, my retreat planning, was wobbly from the get-go. Well, that's a huge chunk of feedback to take, right? As I plan the next one and the next one and the next one. I have to be solid in my decisions. I have to be solid in what I'm providing. I have to know that the experience that I'm providing trumps everything else as far as logistic goes and how it looks on paper. I have to know that my belief in myself, my belief in the people that I'm attracting is going to be the thing that makes it a huge success. There's so much feedback in our failures. So even if you don't succeed the first time, what you're going to take away from that is what you need to shift the next time. You know, think about like the most literal example of this, like running a race. Like if you are running a race and the first time you place very last place, number one, you still fucking did it. So that's not a fail in my book. But number two, now you know, right? Now you know, maybe you should have trained better. Maybe you should have slept better the night before. Maybe you should have hydrated. Maybe you should have had a better plan for the race day. Like whatever it is, you wouldn't know that without actually running the race. You wouldn't know that unless you showed up for it. So what is there for you if it doesn't appear like things are working out? And here's the other thing. Often it's not like a full-on failure that we experience. It's like this detour, right? And so it's in those moments where it's like, well, this is going south, or this doesn't appear to be working out the way that I had it perfectly planned out in my head. What is there for you to see? Why is it not going the way that you thought it would? What is required of you to get you back on course? What needs to shift? What do you need to do differently? What are the things that aren't working, that don't seem to be aligned with where you're going? There is so much feedback, so much knowledge, so much growth that comes from failing, if we choose to look at it in a positive light. And that is the challenge here. And then the third thing, and this one was like shown to me so clearly that you should focus on rather than your quote unquote failure, is that failure simply is showing you that something wasn't aligned, or that you were not ready, or that it was not the right time right now. What is it that you can take away and recognize this is simply a redirection for me? This is a pivot. It's not a failure unless we look at it that way. Most of the time when we're not getting exactly what we want when we want it, it's because we're not ready for it. And that is a harsh truth. And when I am looking at my mini retreat that I had, the week before that, my husband was in the ER. The day of the arrival, it was a freaking blizzard. I had my chef that was supposed to be coming from Denver, had my retreat went off the way that I had planned for it to. So many things that I can look back now and say, oh my God, the timing was not right. It was off from the beginning. It never felt right. And now I can see, because of how these events played out, I wasn't meant to be there serving all these people at that point in my life. I was still coming down from a pretty big experience in my own personal life, which has led to a huge just shift in perspective and my own personal growth. And so I know for a fact that quote unquote failure, that was exactly how it was meant to go down. It was meant for me to be in this intimate group of people where I had more space for myself, for my own healing, for my own reflection, for my own growth. And that wouldn't have been possible if things went according to my plan. if I had what I would have considered a success. But we get really close-minded when it comes to our achievements because we're taking it so personally. Again, it's that ego. It's like, well, now I have to explain myself. Well, now people have questions. Well, now they're doubting me. These are things that we're putting on ourselves. If something isn't working out for you right now, and you know in your heart that it is meant for you, that is an initiation for you to keep showing up and rising to the occasion. That is your initiation to prove that you're ready for it, to battle that storm, that failure, and to keep showing up for it, keep showing up for the things that you want. But it's also, again, that feedback that something's off, something's not right. The timing, it's not meant to happen right now. Now, whether that's a reflection of circumstance, of what else could be, the potential that's out there that you can't see, or whether that's a reflection of you and your growth and the way that you're still showing up and what is actually required of you to make this thing happen. There is so much wisdom to be found in our failures, and it's not always immediate. That's what I want to also share with you, because I know for me it was immediate. It was like, oh my God, can you imagine if the week before where my husband's having this whole situation with his health, I'm so distracted, just so concerned with that. Can you even imagine how my mental load would have been going into that week, leaving my family? I would have been so stressed out. So I could immediately see the value in like, oh, wow, this really wasn't meant to happen right now. Sometimes it's not that obvious. Sometimes it feels like we failed or it just didn't work out. And it wasn't meant to in that moment, even though we don't know why. We're not given the answer of like, here's why, but here's what I can guarantee you. If you stay in it, if you keep showing up for that thing, if you take the feedback, refine, if you take a look inward and continue to show up, eventually you will be shown exactly why it didn't work out. And you know what I have found is that most of the time it's because there's something bigger, better, more aligned waiting for you. And that's some truth. I love the quote, if not this, something better. And I always say that. If I have a discovery call and the client doesn't work out, that's okay. If not that, something better, a more aligned client is coming to me any day. I'm going to have more clarity on who I want to serve, on the impact that I can create. But it doesn't always happen on our timeline. It's not always happening when we think it's right or when our ego says, but it has to happen right now and exactly like this. There has to be a level of trust, even if you can't see in the moment that it is happening for you. It is happening for you. There is always a much bigger play at hand that we can't even see. There is a bigger plan that goes beyond what we can see, what we can even dream of for ourselves. So if this opportunity, if this thing isn't working out for you right now, it's because there's something better coming. It's because there's more required of you. It's because it's not the right time for whatever reason. And you do have to trust in that, so that you can keep moving forward, so that you don't feel defeated. And trust me, I know in the moment how easy it is to feel completely defeated, to feel like this is the sign that this isn't for me. You know in your heart what is meant for you. You know in your heart what you're capable of. You know in your heart what you desire to create in this lifetime. So don't let the fear of failure. Don't let the act of failure be the thing that keeps you from going after what you know to be true in your heart. When you're going to look back, a failure, and this is so what I see, oh my God, with this retreat. I mean, I said it the second that I was like looking for other dates. I'm like, I don't know why this is happening right now, but I know that this is meant to be part of my story. I know that this has to be part of my story. That I had to have something that felt so personal and so just shattering, honestly. Like it felt like I was going to break in that moment. I felt so fragile in that moment. And I knew that that had to be part of my story. For whatever reason. I don't know yet. To inspire you, to inspire me, to show myself what I'm actually made of and capable of, to grow a little bit thicker of skin. I don't know. I don't know exactly why, but I know that it's part of my story. And that's the thing. You look at anyone that is successful, they will tell you mistake after wrong turn, after failure that got them to where they are. All the people that told them no, all the people that doubted them, all the times it didn't work, all the odds that were stacked against their favor. And the difference is they kept going. They kept showing up. They didn't let that failure define them. They didn't let that be the plot of their story. This is one tiny little piece of your story. And I don't care if we're talking about the retreat that didn't go as planned or your failed marriage. It's one tiny little piece of your story. And you are writing a freaking novel. And when you look back, even though it feels so defeating in the moment, you're going to be able to connect the dots and see that that is the thing that led you exactly where you were meant to be. And that piece that felt so big, like the biggest thing ever, part of your life, that it felt like your world was completely upside down, it's going to be so tiny in your story of all that you've done in your life, of all your successes, of the trials that you've overcome. Your failures are just a testament of what you're capable of what you can withstand. And every time that you choose to show up after a quote unquote failure, you're going to become stronger. Your foundation is going to become more solid. You're building confidence in yourself. And honestly, even though it doesn't feel like it in the moment, you're building the confidence of others that are watching you and watching you move through and navigate these hard times that are all part of your journey, that are going to be part of your success story. I know that. I know that so deep in my heart. I need you to know that too. And I need you to not be so worried about the failure that it keeps you from even starting. So I have a little challenge for you. The next time that your logical brain wants to tell you all the reasons why it's not going to work, or it's so far away, like it might work, but it could also take you 15, 20 years to make it happen. I want you to shut that part of your brain down, okay? We're not interested in that part of the conversation. We're not interested. What happens if I fail? What happens if it doesn't work out? What happens if I quit this job and then I go to the next one and it's even worse? Been there, done that. Guess what? Still led me exactly where I meant to be. There is no such thing as failure. It is feedback. It is redirection. It is so much growth waiting for you. And so we are not interested in the conversation of the what if and the doomsday talk and all the freaking doubt that comes along with it. I'm interested in hearing why you're going to make it work, why you want it, why it's so important to you, why it lights you up, and how you're going to do it. despite that it might take a really long time, despite that you don't have the experience, despite that it doesn't look like it's actually working right now. That's the conversation that I'm interested in having with you. That's the conversation that I want you to be interested in having with other people, including with yourself. This is the conversation that we have to be willing to have with ourselves. We can sit here and talk about all the reasons that we're going to fail, or it might not work out, or that we're not ready yet. Or we can sit here and we can ground into the possibility. We can ground into the knowing that you have that it's meant for you. We can ground into the trust that it's going to work out, even if you have to fail 5 times before you get there. That's the power move right there. It's not focusing on the failure. The failure is in the doomsday that makes us like we can't even swallow, we can't even breathe. The failure might be there, that's a fact. And I'm not trying to tiptoe around that. You could very much fail. You could fall flat on your face. And I know that you're going to be redirected. I know that you're going to learn so much. I know that if it doesn't work out the way that you want it to, there's a reason behind it that's so much bigger than you can understand. So we've got to be open to getting curious about what could work out for us. We have to be willing to shut down the conversations and the fear in our head that's running the show, or the disappointment, or that feeling of failure. We have to let it go. And we have to focus on the possibility. We have to focus on the positives that are coming out of that failure. This is a huge perspective shift. This is so much of an invitation for you. I really can't think of a time in my life that it felt like I was failing and I didn't, and there wasn't something great that came out of that eventually. You are not a quitter. I know that about you. And that's the whole thing. That's what I say about myself all the time. If I say something, I'm probably going to do it. It might not look how I think. It might take me 10 times longer than my ambitious little brain wants to think. But if I set my mind to it, it's going to happen one way or another. And that might include a failure or a setback along the way. And that is okay. That's part of the journey. And if you can look at it that way, those failures are going to be the things that make you so strong and so ready for what is coming next. Because there is more waiting for you, and it's probably bigger than you can expect. And sometimes these failures or these tests that we're given, it's just to make sure that we're solid for when it actually comes to fruition, for when the thing comes falling into our lap, that we can actually hold it, that we can enjoy it, that we can sustain it. So failure is not a negative. Failure can be positive because you are pushing your edges and you are growing. You are getting so much feedback on you, on what is required of you, of what is next for you. And if it's not working out, it's because it wasn't the right time. It's because we weren't ready. It's because there's something else at play that we can't see. And you really have to trust that. If you aren't failing, you aren't trying. And I know for damn sure that you are showing up and trying. So I want to hear about your failures. I want you to be celebrating your failures. And I definitely don't want failure to be the thing that's going to stop you from moving towards what you know is meant for you. It's part of the journey. It's going to be part of your success story. So keep going and don't let the failure be the thing that stops you in your tracks. To those of you that tune in every single week, thank you. I hope you already know just how much I love you. If you are just finding me or just stepping into my work, welcome. I am so happy that you are here. You can find more of me and my work on Instagram at Freely Sarah Heredia. I also am hosting a women's self-discovery retreat May 20th through 22nd at the most fabulous location here in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. And I still have space for you to join me there. If you are looking for more consistent support and community, I want to tell you about my women's group, The Nest. We offer a monthly membership where you have access to the entire community of amazing women who are doing big things and crushing life, plus all the calls that we have throughout the month. Or you can drop into any single call that we have that interests you. So you can find more on all of this and all of my work through the link in the show notes. But no matter how long you have been with me, thank you for being here. And truly, I would love to see more of you.